to join us here again for another update, another Titanic Expedition webinar, looking at 2023 here.
This is a little scene recording of the call preparing for Ocean Gate's 2023 and final season. It was attended virtually by passengers of the submersible, called mission specialists by the company, a workaround of passenger certification laws, and essentially it acted as a briefing for the coming weeks. This video was sent to me along with some other interesting internal materials, anonymously by a former Ocean Gate passenger, just a week or two after the disaster in 2023. I've held on to it all this time for obvious reasons. I've been assured that all of the material was shared in full with the ongoing investigation as well. It's mostly operational information, but about 20 minutes into it, Stockton Rush, the late CEO, says this.
We do a risk assessment, covers 5 major areas where we look at things like dive location or crew issues. So, have we had a lot of long days? Are we in a new location? Is the weather worse than forecast? Is there high currents? Number of things that add risk, none of which might be disqualifying, but collectively together would be. And so we focus on where we might be looking at the most risk. So maybe it's on the vessel. Maybe we added a piece of equipment, or we had to change a thruster, or we had some other maintenance that was pretty significant. So that would be a risk factor we want to look at. Really is one of many steps that we try to take to identify where the risks are, because they're often not where you expect them. And we'll do this. We also do a survey of all the participants in the dive operation to basically say, how comfortable are you? We found that incidents and events seem to happen, and after the fact, people say, yeah, I wasn't feeling that comfortable anymore. And so we're really trying to gauge that. Where's the team feeling? Where are all the participants feeling? Where's the equipment? And try to look at that holistically as to, okay, what's our risk? What are we doing? Is this smart, or should we wait till we've been able to reduce the risk down?
He speaks with such authority that it's no wonder paying passengers were confident in his and the submersible's abilities. But the truth is, these attempts at soothing concerns or worries were, in my opinion, completely disingenuous, because we know now that the submersible's very design was obviously flawed, and serious defects were ignored or even brushed under the rug, meaning the risks were actually exactly where you would expect them. And in my opinion, Stockton Rush was doing a bait and switch, directing scrutiny from fare-paying passengers away from the actual design of the submersible and towards things like operational routine. I'll come back to this later. From its testing in 2018 to its destruction in 2023, it's thought that Titan performed around 90 dives. But amazingly, there are machines out there that have performed significantly more, and not to destruction at that. One, in particular, is the Legend of Legends. Over 5,200 dives and countless accomplishments. It's the submersible that first explored Titanic, and it can reach depths in excess of 4 miles. That's about 6.5 kilometers. But most impressive of all is the fact that it was built and designed almost half a decade before humans first walked on the moon. Let's wind the clock back a little while. In the 1800s, science fiction writers and adventurers alike had been drawn to the allure of the deep ocean, an almost alien environment, one never really explored by humans before. Diving bells had been used all the way back to the 4th century, a kind of enclosed capsule with an air pocket that allowed the diver to breathe. In fact, they're still in use for heavy industrial work on the likes of mid-ocean platforms and oil rigs, where the bell can be lowered to the work depth with the crew inside, adjusting for the pressure all the way. The major enemy to deep-sea exploration has always been the pressure. Hydrostatic pressure, as it's known, is essentially the weight of water. The greater the depth, the more water there is above, the more weight it creates. This builds a pressure that's actually hard for us to even imagine. In the deepest parts of the ocean, like the Mariana Trench, pressure can be up to 15,750 psi. That's about 8 tons of crushing force every square inch. Now, obviously, this needs some pretty serious engineering to withstand. In the 1930s, the adventure engineering duo Charles Beebe and Otis Barton introduced the bathysphere, essentially a ball made up of steel about 4.75 feet or 1.45 meters across, Its walls were 1 inch, that's 25 millimeters thick, and all up it weighed over 2 tons. But what's incredible about this piece of machinery is how advanced it was for its time. Inside were oxygen tanks, a telephone with a coil and a battery charging box, chemical trays to absorb the carbon dioxide produced from breathing, searchlights with their own switch box, a barometer, humidity recording devices, and other instruments. Beebe and Barton set out to show what this incredibly advanced bit of kit could do, and in 1934 they made it down to 923 meters. That's over 3,000 feet. 15 years later, the bathysphere's successor, the bentoscope, would make it to 4,500 feet. That's 1.4 kilometers deep. Beebe and Barton had set a precedent because virtually all future deep-sea exploration vehicles would use the very principles they'd set out to establish. The secret to the bathysphere and the bentoscope's success was the fact they used a sphere compartment, that metal ball. Simply put, a sphere performs very well under pressure because the compression, even at its most severest form deep in the ocean, acts across its face in uniform with no opportunity for build-up in any one specific area. Now, the bathysphere was a breakthrough. It meant for the first time humans could descend far below and see creatures we'd never seen alive before. But there was an obvious limitation to its usefulness. The submersible couldn't move by itself. This changed in the 1960s with the introduction of a more advanced machine, the bathyscaphe Trieste, a manned, powered submersible with a pressure sphere slung underneath. It set out to smash the depth record, and boy did it ever. In 1960, the thing made it down to over 10,500 meters. That's more than 35,000 feet, to the depth where 8 tons of pressure were acting on every square inch of the pressure hull. It was so intense that one of the portholes actually cracked with force enough that it shook the entire submersible. Now, obviously, the navies of the world saw great value in this kind of technology. In 1963, the nuclear sub USS Thresher was lost with all hands in water over 2.5 kilometers, or 8,000 feet deep, and her wreck had to be found. The US Navy bought the bathyscaphe Trieste and used it to hunt for the missing sub. Ultimately, the sub's successor, Trieste II, would play a crucial role in finding Thresher. But the precedent was set, and the US Navy was keen to invest in some proper technology to assist in exactly these kinds of missions in the future. The Trieste and machines like it just weren't maneuverable. But as early as 1956, there were calls for the US Navy to build its own maneuverable deep-sea craft, and in 1962, the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution called for bids for the construction of a machine based on the designs of Barton and Frohman. The contract was won by General Mills. Yes, the same General Mills that makes Lucky Charms and Cinnamon Toast Crunch, but who at the time had an aeronautical research and electronics division. The design called for a clever blending of the approach Beebe and Barton had taken way back in the 1930s and provided more maneuverability. A simple lightweight shell housed the kinds of machinery you'd find on any military submarine: an electric motor and propeller for propulsion and direction keeping, a sturdy frame to support the ballast, the air tanks and the batteries, but at the center of it all was the personnel sphere. Relying on the same basic engineering principles as the bathysphere, Alvin's original sphere was 6 feet wide and made up of HY-100 military-grade, high-yield steel, about 2 inches thick. That's 5 centimeters. It provided room enough for a pilot and 2 observers who could look through plexiglass windows. The hatch at the top of the sphere wasn't a natural weak point as you might imagine it would be. With the pressure acting on it from the outside, it effectively acted like a wedge, and the water tightness increased the deeper the Alvin went. It's difficult to relay exactly how much testing and thought went into all of this. For 1964, this was all cutting edge, of course, and it was real pioneering stuff. In fact, 3 spherical hulls were made, just in case, but nobody was certain how well they'd perform in the real world. One of the hulls was put into a test chamber. They had originally been rated for 6,000 feet, but then the pressure was cranked up to over 9,600 feet, but the hull stayed intact, and then, with a boom, the chamber's lid blew clean off. So, Alvin was born. It made more than 70 tethered shallow test dives, and then in 1965 first made it down to 6,000 feet and was certified by the Navy. Alvin's career is mind-boggling. In its first few years of use, it had assisted in finding a missing hydrogen bomb that had sunk to the bottom of the ocean after a mid-air collision. Alvin's work has been featured in over 2,000 scientific papers. It's given the world science community an invaluable glimpse of the most remote parts of our planet. But it wasn't always smooth sailing. In 1968, the sub sank while in transit and came to rest on the bottom of the Atlantic. Fortunately, it could be raised and was put back into service. Alvin is such a specialist piece of equipment that the old adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, truly applies. And while there have been newer, more advanced deep-sea subs built since Alvin, it still works with the organisation that commissioned it back in the 60s, exploring the world's oceans. In fact, Alvin's most famous moment came in 1986, when it explored the wreck of Titanic, which had been found just the year prior. By then, the sub had received an improved, thicker and larger pressure sphere made up of titanium, about 3 inches or 7.62 centimetres thick. But interestingly, like a real-life ship of Theseus, Alvin today has received so many refits and upgrades that hardly any of the original parts still survive. Submersibles like Alvin have been the standard for decades since. The Russian Mirs are probably the most famous of the bunch. You've seen them on virtually every Titanic film and documentary from the 2000s. They were the vehicle of choice for James Cameron's expeditions to the wreck. Mir 1 and Mir 2 were rated to almost 20,000 feet, and that's 6 kilometres deep. And they've got room enough for a crew of 3 inside of that pressure hull, and sure enough, it's also a sphere, a ball with 5 centimetre, 2-inch thick walls made not of titanium, but a steel alloy that provides significant strength to weight ratio benefits. This pair of subs first entered service in 1987, and they were only recently laid up. Today they're on display in museums after a 3-decade-long career that saw them visit the wrecks of Titanic, the German battleship Bismarck, the Russian nuclear subs Komsomolets and Kursk, the Japanese sub I-52, and even a Spanish galleon. So, generations of submersibles have followed a simple pattern that focuses on the pressure-resistant properties of the sphere for deep-sea operations. It's a simple premise, but it has one downside. You see, casting and actually outfitting a steel alloy or titanium sphere isn't exactly cheap, to be sure, but not only that, the size of the thing is restricted by the operating conditions. See, Alvin's pressure hull, 3 inches thick and made of titanium, can make it down to something like 21,300 feet or 6.5 kilometres. But the trade-off is in the delicate balance between size and weight and the number of people you can actually fit inside. See, Alvin has room for just 3 people. But if you wanted to squeeze 1 or 2 more in, you'd need a significantly bigger sphere. In fact, the size and the thickness of the sphere would increase exponentially with every person you add room for. And of course, so too does the weight. Now, this is bad for a few reasons. Notably because the sub actually needs to be light enough to even be able to surface in the first place. And with room for 3 people, Alvin already sits at around 17 tons. But the vehicle has to be also recoverable by a crane or a support vessel. The bigger the sub, the heavier it gets. The harder it is to operate, and the more things there are that can actually just go wrong. It's a losing formula. But capacity for 1 pilot and 2 observers has traditionally served these kinds of vehicles really well. So, imagine if a company were to come along to try to change the mold, to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. Well, in the 2010s, OceanGate set out to do just that. And critically, they steered away from the tried and true pressure sphere design and opted for something more radical, a carbon fibre composite cylinder. Now, the reasoning for this was simple. Their business and commercial model meant they needed more paid seats inside the sub for it to be a successful venture. A pilot and a subject matter expert would leave room for 3 mission specialists, paying passengers, who at $250,000 a pop would generate the revenue enough to keep the operation afloat. But the hull, the cylinder with those 5 people inside, then also had to be light enough so that the sub could be operationally effective and actually recoverable. Enter the notorious carbon fibre. I won't go too much into this because a lot of this is common knowledge now, but carbon fibre is a shocking material choice for a submersible vehicle. Not because it won't work, but because it will definitely fail over time. Every time the sub goes down and comes up, it's undergoing a pressure cycle that sees the hull subjected to enormous forces gradually that are then released as it comes up again. The pressure compresses the hull and then allows it to return to form at the surface. But this kind of pressure cycling works fine in an aircraft. but the insane figures at depth meant that each and every time the thing went down, strands of the carbon fiber would fail and the hull would get weaker and weaker. But what's most shocking of all is how well known this was, even at the time Titan was being developed. Let me introduce you to the Deep Flight Challenger. This was a submersible designed to reach the bottom of the Mariana Trench as well, and crucially, it was the first in history to be built with a pressure hull made up of carbon fiber bonded with epoxy. Testing began way back in 2007. By 2014, an inescapable conclusion had been reached. Deep Flight Challenger's hull was good enough only for single use. Its new owners, by then Richard Branson's Virgin Oceanic, realised that repeated cycling would weaken the carbon fibre hull with every single dive. In fact, the craft had been designed originally with single use actually in mind. The company's president said that, quote, "The problem is the strength does decrease after each dive. It is the strongest on the first dive." That should have closed the chapter on carbon fibre composite submersible hulls. And if OceanGate's senior leadership had fired up Yahoo News in late 2014, they'd have seen this article, which said, plain as day, "Safety is likely the main concern. Deep Flight stopped backing the project after Virgin announced that it would attempt 5 dives, since Challenger was only meant to survive 1. It didn't want to be attached to expeditions that could easily go wrong." Today we know, and the Netflix documentary shows, that for OceanGate, the repeated concerns over the use of carbon fibre in such a vessel were raised and ignored again and again. But it's shocking that similar project safety issues were so plainly and obviously ignored when the writing was on the wall, even before Titan was even a thing. OceanGate began seriously building Titan about 2 years after Deep Flight Challenger was shelved, even though they'd be made of similar materials. In fact, the company that made Challenger's hull would then go on to make Titan's first hull as well. But probably the biggest red flag, and one of the worst of OceanGate's many sins, was the decision not to have Titan independently classed. In this rather helpful article written by the company themselves, they address this very issue, saying this: "Classing agencies only focus on validating the physical vessel. They do not ensure that operators adhere to proper operating procedures and decision-making processes, 2 areas that are much more important for mitigating risks at sea." It ends with this: "Classing is not sufficient to ensure safety. Classing standards do have value, but by itself, classing is not sufficient to ensure safety. In part, this is because classing does not properly assess the operational factors that are vital for ensuring a safe dive." This shocking and complete disregard for the actual classing and safety of the physical design of Titan is really at the core of the venture's failure. It comes off as a bitter, kind of cynical attempt at waving away any concerns and focusing instead on maintaining a, quote, "focused corporate culture." Something we know now that OceanGate certainly didn't maintain anyway, since all of the internal critics were duly dismissed. Remember that bait and switch I mentioned at the start of the video? Well, this was it. Fare-paying passengers were intentionally directed away from scrutinising the design and engineering of the submersible and the inherent risks that carried. Instead, they were shown a squeaky clean safety approach to risk management in the operation of the sub, the day-to-day systems and routines that kept it in the water. Now, no criminal charges have been filed surrounding the Titan tragedy, but in this simple YouTuber's opinion, there's a smoking gun here for an entire organisation that attempted to mislead its paying customers at nearly every step of the way, to the point they were comfortable with signing a waiver that warned of the potential for their own deaths. When quizzed about the design of the Titan, Stockton Rush said this: "I think it was General Douglas MacArthur who said, 'You're remembered for the rules you break.' And you know, I've broken some rules to make this. I think I broke them with logic and good engineering behind me. The carbon fibre and titanium, there's a rule you don't do that. Well, I did." Those rules, by the way, are the same rules that have kept submersibles like Alvin in safe service for 6 decades. The Titan was a tragedy, years and years in the making. But I think what makes it so infuriating is how obvious the danger was, how well studied and recorded the performance of carbon fibre pressure hulls was within the deep sea exploration community. Another venture had declared publicly that it would not proceed with a carbon fibre composite hull for the exact reasons that led to Titan's destruction. As a design, Titan worked. It could dive far down, but only so many times. That's the critical point. By comparison, there are designs like Alvin that have worked for generations. We know why they work. We know how pressure at depth works, and we also know that carbon fiber is not a good material for this job if you want to do more than one or a handful of dives. At the same time Titan was being built and tested, another deep-sea vehicle was under construction. Then called the Limiting Factor, now known today as the Bakunawa, it holds the record for the deepest dives in all 5 of Earth's oceans. And guess what? It uses a spherical hull, 3.5 inches of grade 5 titanium alloy, and it's commercially certified. Vehicles like Limiting Factor can trace their ancestry directly all the way back to the bathysphere of the 1930s. In 2012, James Cameron piloted Deep Sea Challenger, a kind of modern-day bathyscaphe Trieste, down to 35,787 feet, that's nearly 11 kilometers. Now, these are the kinds of vehicles and entrepreneurial teams and leaders that really push the boundaries of what humans and engineering can accomplish down there. And they do it by following the lessons from the past, learning what works on the machines that have come before them, and playing within the boundaries of certification, classing, and the conventional wisdom provided by regulatory bodies that exist for good reason. To do anything other than this would be foolish in the extreme, a kind of hubris that is difficult to put into words. In February and March this year, Alvin was at it again. Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution deployed the legendary submersible to explore a lost First World War American submarine, USS F1, that sank with 19 of her crew back in 1917. Today, there are no known plans to shelve Alvin. It's carried more than 10,000 people to the bottom of the ocean. There are lessons to be learned from the Titan affair, lessons paid for with the lives of 4 innocents and its main inventor, but there are probably greater lessons to be taken away from the successful careers of Alvin, the Mears, and everything that has come since. They work for good reason. They don't break the rules, they make them.
Why not turn it on?
Disney, yeah, that's a part of their...
Vinny's walking around with his lightsaber. Look at me! I'm like Luke Skywalker. I mean, it's disgusting. It's gross.
Yeah.
And
this is what's under the surface of all these
Vinny,
guys.
100%.
Remember, we see like those right-wing influencers or media figures, whether it's Steven Crowder, that talk about their feeds on occasion, and they'll point out that like it's all black people fighting or something like that, exactly. Or it's all like race war stuff. This guy's telling on himself, Vinny, that he has a group chat as like I don't know how old this man is, but a grown adult bullying some random person, most likely, that they just send videos back and forth.
Cackling about people they don't understand.
Cackling about people, right. Or that make them feel uncomfortable because they can't examine their own relationship to their own gender and their own sexuality, which is a majority of the reaction most of the time. It's the defensiveness.
And Bet David is pissed. And Adam is pissed because this is the part that we don't show on the show.
Yes.
This is for us.
Leave it
to
in
make
the
it more
group chat.
artful when we
Yes, exactly. We're trying to pretend like we're reasonable and not pieces of garbage. So this isn't what we show. They know. This is the thing. They know.
Shame is to be had.
At their core, what they're doing is wrong. And they don't want that. We're not supposed to pull that curtain back, Vinny. You went too far. Because had they brought this up before the cameras started going live, they'd have spent a half an hour on this.
Hilarious, yep.
And
it's
somehow always the guys that are most obsessed with performing masculinity, that are this obsessed with people who are non-binary or trans or perform gender in a different way. I mean, that guy is like as red as it can be and wearing what does it say? Angry Patriot shirt, jacked up.
Yep.
I mean, give me a break.
I'd be way more concerned about a guy like him at Disney. I'm sorry.
Oh my God, are you kidding?
Totally.
Gross. So Patrick Bet David should do the appropriate thing and just tell Vinny, apologize.
Yes.
Apologize. Apologize to your audience. Apologize to that individual on there who absolutely deserves it not to be. I mean,
become a
God
to
knows
millions of people.
Exactly.
Doing that in $1 million studio. It's just so sick.
So gross.
Look at this. Look at this. I mean, he sounds like he's 13.
Yeah, I mean, he's pretty much
mentally
13, and is never gonna, reach maturity.
It's really more like emotionally 13.
Exactly.
Right.
646-257-3920 is the phone number. 646-257-3920 is the phone number. Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.